I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Jean-Michel Six, who's Chief European Economist at Standard & Poor's. Thanks for coming out here to join us, Jean-Michel. This meeting, the presidential palace is trying to play it down a little bit, but he's got some seriously tough choices ahead of him.
Absolutely. I think we are now getting very close to decision times. There are very important and difficult decisions that have to be made. They've been delayed and delayed. And now everybody knows, first the markets, of course, but even public opinion in France expect now a verdict to be rendered by the government as far as the tax policies are concerned, as far as the pension reforms are concerned. All those very important decisions have to be made now.
But that pension reform is due to have its first outing in the Assembly on the 7th of September to increase the minimum pension age from 60 to 62. The unions have pledged to fight that. They've called it brutal. I mean, could we see the president backing down in the face of protests, as we have seen previous French governments do?
I'm not expecting the government to back down on in September on the pension reform, but I think my concern would rather be that this particular focus on the pension reforms would sort of delay or postpone again other important decisions. This is only one aspect of the problem, the pension reform. In particular, we are now looking at the growth assumptions that are going to be made for next year. By how fast can we expect the French economy to grow?
Well, we already heard this morning, didn't we, reports in the French press that the government is going to downgrade its growth forecasts from 2.5% to 2%. Is that more realistic now?
That's clearly more realistic. I think we at S&P are expecting the economy to grow between 1.5% and 2% next year. That's very close to the consensus. What would be very smart, I think, would be to have a couple of scenarios for next year presented by the government, a high side scenario where you have indeed 2.5% growth, which is not totally out of question, and then a low growth scenario between 1.5% and 2%, and see what are the choices you would make in either cases in terms of receipts. Because the problem now is not so much a question of spending. They have frozen public spending for the next few years. I think they've done pretty much as they could on the spending side.
But in terms of taxes, Sarkozy has promised not to increase taxes, so he hasn't left himself much wiggle room.
Indeed, and you have to remember that that promise was made before the beginning of the crisis. That promise was made during the presidential campaign at a time when the world economy was growing. That was made well before we entered into a recession. That particular promise is not realistic anymore, and I think, frankly, everybody knows that. It's just a question of admission now that this is no longer a sustainable promise.
OK, well, we'll have to wait and see what the president decides. We should get a communique out from that meeting later on. Jean-Michel Six, Chief European Economist at Standard & Poor's, thanks so much for joining me there.